Welcome to a small session on multi-cloud. Having slight issues with multi-cloud at the moment, so that's, or it's computers. Anyways, first of all, remember you have seen this before, but please silence your phones. If you need to drop out and take a phone call, that's understandable, but at least have the sound off. Okay. You're speaking? Good. And again, you've seen it thousands of times, but as a SQL Saturday organizer and as a local chapter leader, I know what it means to be getting free training from your community, so explore everything PAS has to offer. All right. My name is Johan Ludvig Brattås. It's a mouthful to pronounce that for non-Norwegian speakers, but I'm a lead solution architect. That's a fancy LinkedIn name I use. I'm a managing consultant and a solution architect for Capgemini, which is a global company you might have heard of. I co-organize SQL Saturday Oslo. I sit on the board for the local chapter in Norway. I'm also running for the board for PAS. You might have seen that. And I'm, in my spare time, when I have any, I'm teaching celiacs how to bake gluten-free foods.
Hi, my name... Oh,
yeah, it is on.
I'm on? Okay.
Yeah.
My name is Rune, Ovlien Rakeie. I work for a Nordic IT service provider called Ovlien, where I work as a data platform architect. I've been working with database technology the last 20 plus years, primarily with SQL Server. In my spare time, I like to do bicycling in the narrow tracks in the forest of my hometown, Arendal, in Norway.
So, again, this is multi-cloud. We're trying to tell you some do's and don'ts or whys and why nots on multi-cloud strategy and what you have to think about. And we would start off by defining what that multi-cloud will be. But first of all, remember that some of you have been to our sessions before, so you know there's a test with cheesy music on it. It's more of a quiz, really, and there will be some prizes. So,
yeah, in the past few years, we have seen an increasing coverage of and discussions that focus about multi-cloud, and I guess it's so much. So much now that they, as in media, they're calling this now a trend. So,
well, my salespeople are calling it a trend, so that must be true.
Yeah, but there are several good reasons to invest in multi-cloud, but there are some pitfalls as well. And actually, there's a lot of things to consider if you're going to go down that path. So let's start with the terminology. Or in this context, what we mean by multi-cloud is that you're using two or more cloud computing services from a number of different public cloud vendors. So there are many definitions out there. But this is our definition, and what we're going to talk about today is in this context, two or more public cloud computing vendors. Thank you. So there are more than one way to adopt multi-cloud. There's the accidental adoption and the more strategic engagement in adopting multi-cloud. So let's dive a little bit deeper into these two different ways to start using multi-cloud. A typical scenario is that, well, the IT department, they decide they want to use, for instance, Office 365. Then the head of sales, they need a new CRM system, for instance, Salesforce. And then you acquire a new company, and they have started using AWS, and suddenly you are a multi-cloud organization. Yeah. A different way to look at this is the more strategic engagement.
The preferred approach.
The preferred approach, where you have a little bit more control. So our first advice is you should pick a primary cloud computing provider. If that's AWS, or if that's Google, or if that's
Azure, yes.
Azure,
yes.
for instance, you should seek to put most of your workloads in that primary cloud. But that's not always possible. So in order to kind of govern that a little bit better, you should apply some kind of policies, some multi-cloud policies that should govern, okay, is this service or is this application available in your primary chosen cloud vendor?
Yep.
Then you should continue using that. If not, you shouldn't discourage, or you shouldn't stop investment in another computing cloud if that gives benefits.
So for instance, we know that, for instance, SAP, even though I'm not very fond of that system, it runs faster and better on Azure. We know that. So let's put that into Azure. However, if the company had decided to go on an AWS approach on the other parts, or as their main provider, for instance, they would like to use lambdas instead of functions, and they are going for, some of you might have heard of the term FAS, which is PaaS, IaaS, SaaS, FAS, and CaaS. FAS is function as a service, and CaaS is container as a service, which is what all the new kids are talking about. Again, my salespeople. But it is a trend that is taking over from microservices, basically. So you're moving from microservices to a serverless compute instead. And that might be, again, it's more of a training thing. The competency of your developers, are they used to working with lambdas, or are they used to working with Azure functions? And that might be why they might go for AWS. And in that case, you will have two different clouds already, but you chose to use Azure for SAP because it's faster and cheaper.
So you have your multi-cloud policy in place. Then you should decide, why should we have multiple clouds within our organization? So to define your goals. So the first reason to have to utilize the multi-cloud is to have increased resiliency and agility. So that would be redundant. You're storing your data redundant across clouds. You might have, your primary cloud where you have your operational workloads, and then you store your backups also in a secondary cloud. There are business continuity reasons. For instance, one scenario that I see in AWS trying to sell is that, okay, you have your primary workload in AWS, but what you could do, you could take snapshots of your disks and copy them to another cloud and attach those to VMs if there's a problem in your primary cloud. And on the agility side of things, that you have configured your workloads in such a way that it's easy to migrate from one cloud to the other. Another reason for utilizing multi-cloud architecture is to achieve cloud neutrality and portability. And that sounds really nice because we would like to avoid vendor lock-in in not only in cloud use, but also in other type of workloads as well.
Yeah, I've actually heard that several times here during this conference. People are slightly afraid of locking in with Microsoft. I don't know why Microsoft is best, but still, it's a valid concern, and there might be different ways to approach this. I worked for a company that actually the networking guys were so afraid of this that they bought a huge router to put between the ISP that routed them to Azure and their internal networks, because that meant that they had one single endpoint to the cloud that they could switch easily. It cost like $50,000 or $100,000 just to implement it. And what it ended up being was slowing everything down, making the investment in Azure Express routes completely a waste of money. So in the end, I think it cost like at least $100,000 for nothing.
Yes, question?
What's your exposure to SD-WAN solution for multi-cloud or cloud in multi-cloud?
Sorry, for
SD-WAN?
I haven't tried it actually. This vendor they put in subnets instead, so express route and subnets, and then just copy data between. But they didn't have any WANs.
The software-defined WAN is like the newest and latest way of optimizing the internet to try to generate, instead of going through the same pipe internally to an office, right? To
Yeah.
go to the cloud. Sometimes it's even worse when you go to the cloud, having to go through the same latency. So you're going that way. Anyways, we can talk about that.
Yeah, no, we haven't tried that. But that's, I'm not sure if we're talking about it, but there might be issues with the different ways that the vendors are routing people into their data centers. Yeah.
I heard in another session that you could use something like where a lot of data centers end up being Equinox data centers, that you can pay for direct connect in those centers. And then you can just easily just pick up the cables from the one side of the data center running cloud provider A to B
Yeah.
much more easily. But it costs a lot of money, and apparently you need like a couple of months of planning just to get your telcos and everyone else involved
Yeah.
to be on the right page.
So the comment is that there's a lot of the vendors, they don't have their own data centers. Actually, they rent them from companies like Equinox. And when same providers use the same data centers internally, you can actually hire the Equinox people to connect directly to the backbone and get a direct access between those two clouds. It's costly, and you need planning to do it, but it is a viable option. Another option is to see basically where they are, and then again, think about how those two different vendors are routing their users in. So AWS basically routes as close to the data center as possible from the internet, whereas Azure and Google are routing people as close to their connection as possible and then taking the backbone in. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about latency and where the cloud centers are.
So back to cloud neutrality.
Yeah.
There are a few ways to implement cloud neutrality or portability to make it easy for you to move from one primary cloud computing vendor to another. And one way to do that is to use cloud agnostic solutions. An example for that, on that is Databricks, if that's a type of solution you are using, or if you are into data warehousing, you could use something like Snowflake, which is soon on all the three major clouds. It is already available both in AWS and in Azure, and it will soon be available in Google Cloud.
Yeah.
That's the data part of things. Of course, most of the database engines is available across clouds. So if you use an open source database like Postgres or MySQL, it's fairly easy to migrate that kind of workload between the clouds.
Yeah, and if you're using Kubernetes, for instance, and Docker, those are also available on all clouds. So again, thinking of how you architecture things might be a way of, again, spreading out and being vendor agnostic.
But this is if you're building a new application now. You might not have this type of application infrastructure in place already. And then it might not be the effort to try to achieve cloud neutrality and portability.
Yeah.
But it's a goal that you can try and reach for to be more flexible. A third reason for multi-cloud is so-called cherry picking. You know, that you choose the best of breed services from different cloud vendors.
For instance, you have the data scientists, they love BigQuery. While us BI people, we like Data Factory and we like what's now Synapse Analytics or SQL Data Warehouse. So combining these two in an effective way could be a nice cherry picking.
Yeah, and as we say here, is it feasible? Maybe. It kind of depends, and there are several factors that, yeah, we'll look a little bit into that later on why it will be, it could be challenging. Speaking of challenges, the first type of challenge we have is so-called, well, it is not a small, but a high risk of increased charges for networking. And also, there's also a difference between the different cloud vendors, how they charge costs when you move data from A to B. So you have intra-availability zone, AZ availability zone charges. You have, within the same cloud computing vendor, you also have intra-region charges. And also, if you move from one cloud computing vendor to another, you will have networking charges.
Yeah, what we call egress. So basically, when you put data into a data center, it's free. But as soon as you pipe it out again, there will be a cost, and that's the egress cost. Also, if you pipe data, so for instance, from Event Hubs or Kafka into BigQuery, that in itself is an extra cost because BigQuery has a cost for streaming.
So as an example here, here we have the different regions that AWS has in Europe. And if we zoom into one of those regions, this is Germany, which has 3 data centers. The dots on the map here is not accurate because I have no idea where they are, but it's just to visualize. This is how they could be placed from each other, actually. 3 different data centers, which is the region as such. And let's see if we can.
I think it's the other way around. You need to point to that one.
Okay. So the ones on the recording won't see this. So the traffic between the availability zone will be charged. Within the availability zone, there won't be an extra cost, but of course, all data that moving outside of this region will there will be an extra cost. Yeah. Another challenge is latency and bandwidth issues. Because when you are in the cloud, there is no longer just feeds between your servers. There are miles, maybe thousands of miles, and that's a challenge. Also, since this is you are running your workload on a shared infrastructure, that also means you share the bandwidth between the old infrastructure, which is within these data centers, and then your traffic could be throttled.
Yep. Most of the vendors have a bandwidth throttling in place to make sure that no specific client takes or steals too much bandwidth from the others. You might not necessarily see that in the day-to-day operations, but it's there.
A third challenge is setting up a disaster recovery solution, as we mentioned earlier, as a reason, as in robustness or as in redundancy between clouds, that could be quite costly, since you are replicating all your data from one cloud computer vendor to the other, so you have double of the storage cost. If you, in addition, have the type of workload that is time sensitive, so you can't have any or very little downtime, that also means you maybe have spun up twice as many VMs or compute units in order to quickly. Are you tired?
No, I have a sciatic nerve.
Okay. Please lie down.
I'm paying attention. Here.
So if you set this up in an active configuration, yeah, you have a double cost. As mentioned previously, you have the egress cost by moving data from one cloud computing vendor to another. And of course, since you have twice the infrastructure, you have the twice amount of maintenance you have to work with across the cloud computing vendors. And when it comes to the people working with these solutions, you have multiple skill sets to learn and maintain. So that might mean you need increased training budgets. Maybe you need more than just the people you have right now. Maybe you need more since there are more compute to handle. Or if you're using primarily consultants, then there might be increased consultants costs. So let's talk a little bit about different types of multi-cloud architecture. So I would say there are two kinds, but related. But first of all, there's the solution architecture, and there's the enterprise architecture. But in order to understand this in a multi-cloud context, let's define what we mean by solution architecture. So these are two different kinds of solution architecture. We have the operational solution, what most of us maybe already know. You have your application or your service, and you have your data storage. On the BI side of things, we have kind of a pipeline where you get your data from one or multiple data sources, you organize it or you transform it in a way that's possible to then analyze the data and then deliver. So that would be to visualize the data to the consumer of the data.
Yep.
And a combined solution architecture would then be that your operational systems is the acquire step. And then you have the transformation analysis and visualization of the data. So in a multi-cloud context, this could be a way to implement this. That in one cloud, you have your operational systems, and you have your transformation, and then you stream or replicate this data to another cloud where you perform the analysis and visualization of the data. A slightly more complex version of a multi-cloud architecture is where in this example you have 4 clouds. And I guess it's easy to see that the more components you implement in a solution, the more complex it will be, and probably also more expensive to maintain.
Yeah. We'll be showing a demo later on of solution architecture for BI, and we'll also be showing a use case which is implemented in real life. So and talk about that, and hopefully you'll see the patterns and recognize the patterns in this.
So this is the solution part of architecture, but you can also go and define that you have an enterprise multi-cloud architecture, and this is where you have several solutions, but you have them within one cloud, but you are using multiple clouds, but you don't have any interaction between the different clouds. Yes?
In the previous slide, what do the red dotted lines represent?
So the question was, what do the red dotted lines in this slide present?
And I think that's a really great question. No.
Good questions.
That's a correct answer. No, the thing is, there is a dotted line missing here on the slide.
There should be one more.
Should have been one more.
just to separate the different clouds. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, many people talk about HCI in like your actual on-prem cloud, you know, where you have everything happening, kind of like what it does for Google, but on-prem, you know, so many people are just trying to try different tastes of clouds up there where you have no control, but HCI, I mean, hyper-converged systems where you can software define all of your hardware and everything, gives you the same cloud solution and the complexity, you can scratch all those complexities and have your own cloud right here.
Yeah, for a private cloud, that is feasible. The problem with the private cloud solutions like that is that it's costly hardware and it's CapEx versus OpEx. So there's lots of people who prefer to just pay as you go instead of.
Nutanix is coming out with a membership type thing. You may want to explore this.
Yeah, comments from the room that might not be heard, but that there are other ways of doing it than just public clouds. But we'll skip that and we can discuss that later on because the topic is public clouds today.
So how should you manage your data in a multi-cloud context? So there are 4 aspects around data management in multi-cloud. And it's, to be frank, it's not only limited to multi-cloud, but it applies also.
It
Anywhere.
applies even more in a multi-cloud solution. Yeah.
So, visibility. Yeah, through your normal business activities, you store a mountain of data. But surveys have shown that, and this was Veritas Databerg survey a few years back, shown that you only utilize 50% of your data. So you generate data through your normal business activities, but you only use 50% of them to give added value to your business. So that is the rest. That means that it's so-called dark data.
Yeah. I suspect this is part of the backbone of every IT nerd. An extra power cable, I might need that later. That old computer, nobody is using it, but it might be useful later on. So we do the same thing with data. It might be useful something later on. In Norwegian, there's a saying, kjekt å ha, so nice to have. We don't know if we'll use it, but we'll just store it for later on anyways. And this, when you do that with data, okay, storage is cheap, so why not? But again, there might be some problems coming down the line for you.
Yeah, because some of this data could be, if you don't have control of it, could be sensitive. It could be you just storing data twice or thrice or 4 times as many times you actually need them. It could be data that is, obsolete. And it could be data that doesn't really have any value. So what should you do? So first of all, you have to figure out, okay, where is my data located?
Where is all my data located?
Yeah, physically as well. Especially if you are a multi-country type of organization.
And multi-cloud.
Where is my data in the world? And then you need to classify your data. So what kind of data do you have? For instance, do you store personal identifiable information? Where is it? And also then, who can or has access to your data?
Yeah, and how sensitive. So it's PII is one thing, but you might have regulatory data as well. And if you just store anything and you don't know where it is and what kind it is, that will cost you.
And you should also apply some kind of data lifecycle management. So, and apply then retention policies for data that are obsolete or redundant or, trivial.
Yeah, and this is also things that are beneficial in the cloud because you can start using the cloud services like Azure Monitor to see when data in your data lake, for instance, has been accessed last time. then you can start applying policies to move data from a hot data lake to a cold data lake. And then again, from the cold data lake, say hot data is 3 years old, maximum. So if it hasn't been accessed the last 3 years, we move it to cold because archive storage is cheaper. And then we have a new policy going on. Okay, do we have any regulatory compliance here that says that we have to store that data for 10 years, 5 years? Or do we just have to have a check saying, okay, do we need that data or not? So again, a trigger saying, this data hasn't been accessed for the last 10 years. Should we delete it or not? Or you can even move now, they even have deep freeze archives in both the AWS and Azure, so which is even cheaper, just the latency is higher. And then you can move it into there and have a new cycle going on, say delete or keep. Yeah, this kind of application or data lifecycle management is easier these days, and it is a sensible way of going on with it. But yeah, sorry.
When you have to bring that data back, like just going into the compliance and regulatory, for instance, CCPA is coming out down the pike, and it's like, oh, we're going to now have to actually look at those backups. And then I'm assuming there's going to be a big charge to try to bring that back, analyze it.
So the question is, if we move data this way from hot to cold to deep freeze, are there any costs involved? Are there any technical issues involved? There is no cost in bringing that data back. The cost is in the time that you have to wait for that data to come back to you. So, and then you have to have your governance on knowing where your data is and the queries needed to bring it back again. So there's, and again, doing compliance, so CCPA, GDPR, you will need to know all about where your data is and build in hooks to prepare for deletion or mapping up and telling, because you can, they can either get your data, ask you to deliver the data to them, they can demand you delete it, they can just demand to know who has accessed that data. So you need to store metadata as well on this. But that's just the extra overhead. There is no actual cost of fetching data from the different storage types. Okay?
So this looks like a lot of work, and it actually is.
Yeah.
So
we won't be going out to work anytime soon in the cloud. Any of us.
What you should seek to achieve or get in order to have this kind of visibility of your data is to, well, to be frank, you need a third-party tool to help you create this single pane of glass.
Yeah, all the vendors have their tooling. So data catalogs, you have Glue data catalog, you have HBase data catalog in AWS, but they don't work across each other. So they're not good enough. And Azure data catalog works across, and it even works multi-cloud if you have an ODBC access to the data you're checking on. But again, it's very limited. So working in a multi-cloud environment increases the thought or the need for having a third-party tool that is good enough.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about data portability. You might have read reports over the years that not all cloud vendors are up and running 24/7, 365. There are some outages, and I guess this example you see here, I think is the worst one. This is, it's a few years ago, but this storage vendor that went out of business and the clients had 2 weeks to retrieve their data. Yeah. That would have hurt, I guess.
Yeah. I was affected by, the lightning strike that hit the Azure Southwest centers in the US a year ago. I was doing a hands-on lab for Microsoft that day. So they hit, the center shut down 7 o'clock Central European time. We had the students coming in at 9. So me and the Microsoft guy, he frantically spun up VMs, and I frantically researched enough samples so we could hold the cores anyway, just using scrambled together. It worked, but it was a pain. So yeah, as lightning strikes happen, even though you say, well, what can happen? They have huge data centers, but yeah, still shit happens.
But that happens in your own data center as well.
Yeah, it does. But then you think about it because that's yours.
I've had lightning strike hit my data center, take up 1,200 servers.
Yeah.
Same company, same data center.
So the lesson that we're trying to teach you here is that you should be prepared for this. This is going to happen. It's not only going to happen on-prem.
Murphy's Law applies.
So you should enable your data and your workloads. Well, first of all, when you're going to the cloud, that it's possible to migrate it there, but also within your cloud of choice. So let's see if you have prepared for this, that this could happen, like redundancy in some way or another, that you can move your data from a region, or already you have prepared for that, so you already have moved your data to another region, so you can continue your business if one region goes down. But also, if you're sick and tired of AWS going down all the time, that you can move your workload to another cloud.
Azure.
For instance, Azure or Google or
Yeah.
something like that. So regulatory compliance. I guess, well, most or many of you already have some regulatory compliance or
Several of them, yeah.
And growing stringent regulatory demands, that means you need to prioritize being compliant, being updated on any changes for these new
Needs,
yeah.
laws, regulations.
Yeah. And also, yeah. And there's also high downside if you're not compliant.
Let's just put British Airways to the test. They were just fined 182 million pounds for being non-compliant in a data breach exposing 500,000 customers. So, yeah.
It's 2% of your global revenue if it's GDPR, even if you're a multinational company.
Yeah, it's a 2%
And it's only
then.
at quarter. If it's only 1/4 percentage of your actual revenue, they don't ding you on that. They ding you on the 2% of your global.
Yeah, that's 2% of your global revenue. So it's, but there's also the trust issue. I had somebody ask me in a security session yesterday on what Microsoft can access our keys, our encryption keys. So if you store them in Key Vault, so could we just bring our own keys? Of course, yes, you can. But on the other hand, what's the cost to Microsoft if it comes out tomorrow that Microsoft reads your private keys and then looks in your data? It's such a huge loss of trust that they won't have any customers left. And that again, trust for you as well. If you breach, you lose trust in your customers, from your customers, you might go out of business.
So data protection. You should consider how your data will be protected. So protection, in this context, I'm talking about data loss prevention. Yeah. So backing up your data. So if you have multiple clouds, that means you have multiple ways to perform backups, multiple ways to restore your data. And one way to handle that, there are vendors out there. We haven't put them in the slides, but there are vendors out there that can help you protect your data across clouds. So you have one, again, a kind of single pane of glass in data protection.
Yep.
Shall we have a little break in the presentation here and see how a multi-cloud
Solution can look like?
solution? Yeah,
Sure.
can look like.
Let's see, I just need to log on. Oi. So, this is a sample data or sensor generator from GitHub that Microsoft has put out. It's been streaming data since 8 o'clock this morning. And it's streaming it to an event hub. So it's basically just sensor A, sensor B, sensor C, timestamp, heat, and humidity. So let's see now if I have my... So as you can see on the event hub, it is running out around 500 messages a minute. Then I've stored that to a blob. So I just basically dump as Avro files. It's a bit costly way of storing data from an event hub, but at the same time it saves me from doing any stream analytics or that kind of pull of data from that event hub. Storing the data in a per hour or per 30 minutes dump into an Avro file. And then I have connected an ETL tool that's called Fivetran. And I used Fivetran this time because it was a free trial. And it connects between my blob store and BigQuery. And that one, let's see if we can get it to show. So I've connected the blob store here. And it's syncing every 30 minutes. Connected it to my BigQuery, which is here. And if we take the BigQuery, since it's a free trial, I wasn't allowed to transform anything, so it's really not telling me a lot of things. Let's see if I can get that result shown. Yeah. So it's not a very intelligent store, but it's storing the file name, when it was synced, modified, and then you have the body of the JSON file. So here, into BigQuery. And it's a stupid demo in the way that this is not a real use case. Typically, you would want to transform, so you only pipe that JSON into a table in BigQuery, and that's it. But it's a quick and messy solution to show something because it's streaming data into BigQuery comes with a cost. So you typically don't want to do that, and running data analysis on streaming data sets are not really useful. Typically, if you want to do analysis on streams, you do things in either Storm or Kafka. Kafka is a bit limited, so Storm or streaming analytics. And then you pipe that out into, for instance, Power BI as a live data set. So BigQuery is for batch analysis, and then you can pipe that data back again into a SQL DB and use that in your data warehouse later on. In this case, though, I've messed up, or not messed up, I've mixed together a Power BI dashboard, which is, no, sorry. If we look at it's simple. I've transformed the body table or column. So I have the timestamp. I didn't bother to look at the date because it's just today anyways. So it's sensor, temperature, and humidity. And it's, let's see now if we can get it updated for the latest. Should be have been updated at 11:30 at least. So while it's connecting, probably not. But again, it's just showing average temperature and average humidity, and then a timeline of different values. Coming there, and it's updated. And it's showing UTC time because I didn't put in the calculation, because since Azure Event Hubs store all their data in UTC, you will need to put on a calculation to add your time or calculate your own time zone. And it's basically you can filter on the different sensors if you want to see what's happening. But then basically, in this kind of sense, I would have had the streaming data set coming in directly from Stream Analytics and the Event Hub to Power BI to show live dashboards. And then I would have piped another stream as a batch into BigQuery for later on analysis, and back again into my data warehouse, if that had been, or for a proper solution of multi-cloud. So that was the demo. It's not much, but as a use case later on we'll see, it's a valid way of architecting. And if you're doing it, you're streaming things directly, and then you're piping smaller amounts or in batches out, and then transferring back again smaller amounts from BigQuery. That way you will store data several places. You don't have to have that kind of egress cost because you reduce the amount each way.
So let's look at the use case then.
Yep. So this is a Norwegian utility company. They Hafslund.
Yeah, this is a system which is in production.
Yeah. And just to be clear, it's not something that we've developed, but we saw they present this on LinkedIn. We contacted them to ask if we could show it because it's a very valid and good use case of how to use multi-cloud strengths as well as avoiding the pitfalls. So let's see if we can. It's hard to choose. They have the different sources. They are, in the top, you have streams of live meters, so automatic meters, piping data in a stream into an event hub. And then they have the different ERP systems, billing systems, and so on, going through a third-party tool, ETL tool called Sesam, which is a nice little tool that allows you to do CDC, schema-less ETL, because you infer the schemas and it keeps track of it and it changes. You don't have to update your pipelines and so on. And then it pipes data into a stream analytics tools, which is called, I can't see what it's called.
Akka.net?
Yeah, Akka. Which it's a third-party, it's a custom-developed streaming tool that they have used. So it's a framework.
And that's hosted.
That's hosted, yeah. And they pipe as well the streaming data directly into Azure storage. Then from that Akka.net, they stream the data into BigQuery, as well as into storage. They do the same thing with Sesam, which is a cloud solution, but it's hosted on Azure, basically. You can host it on AWS as well, but if you just purchase it as they have from Sesam directly, it's hosted on Azure in VMs. But you don't see that. It's basically just another platform.
Software as a service.
Yeah. And then you send that data, pipe data, to both places at the same time. Again, this way, even though Sesam is paying for the egress, so you're paying for the service, you are minimizing the egress costs. And then BigQuery is where they run their advanced analytics queries on that data, and they pipe it back into their data warehouse and into their reporting solution. So in this way, they use third-party tools to keep control of their data. They use both our multi-cloud solution to get the best of both clouds. We can, of course, discuss whether or not BigQuery is better than anything else, but that's what they preferred. And in this way, they will be able to adopt a successful multi-cloud framework. Yeah?
Hmm.
Yeah? Question?
Do you know what they were using before? And how this is a better solution?
Yeah, if do we know what they were using before? Yes, they were doing most of their stuff on-prem. and they were getting batches of metadata in, so it was updated every hour, I think. So it was not as live as it is now. And they were using SQL Server and Oracle as their data storage.
But they also have had several iterations
Yeah.
of this solution. One early version of this, which was presented in the user group back home in Norway, they didn't use Google. They used only Azure tools, and they used Azure Data Warehouse as their kind of query engine. But I didn't like that much because, first of all, they tried to update the data instead of just loading data, and that gives you quite poor performance when using Azure SQL Data Warehouse. But they also found it rather costly. That being said, using BigQuery is also rather costly. But still, this is the solution they have ended up with, and they're happy with, and they also their claim is that they have in egress costs around $10,000 a year. And it's quite a lot of data. I don't know the exact volume of data they're moving, but
I think it's a lot. I worked for a competitor, and they were struggling to collect all the information fast enough. So they're like, all the servers are like peaking all the time when they received all the data from the IoT stuff.
Yeah, this is Hafslund, so they are providing electricity to the central eastern part of Norway, so Oslo and southwards. And that's the most densely populated. In US terms, that's nothing. We're like 2 million people maybe. But still, there's a lot of households, a lot of data coming in, and these sensors are streaming data in every second.
They're reading live
Yeah.
consumption from all the
So it's live consumption, and they also check on the power, the producer, so the power stations as well. Yeah. And I know what they pay for the
that's
system
the
part as well.
egress cost.
That's the egress cost, yeah. The ETL part is way higher. Trust me, yeah. Yeah. I know what it is, but I'm not allowed to tell, so yeah. Question?
Does a multi-cloud and multi-tool implementation like this make it hard to maintain regulatory compliance for the entire application end-to-end?
So the question is the multi-cloud and third-party solution like this make it harder to comply or keep up with regulations and so on?
Yeah, because like my understanding is that like each cloud provider says that, oh, like, you know, if you implement stuff on our cloud, then you are certified. You have these certifications versus these certifications.
Yeah.
If you integrate across all of these, like, is that a real problem for customers?
Yeah. So this question, the comment onwards is that all providers come with claims about their certifications, and how can we apply this here? The thing is, when you design this from the ground up, you need to take into consideration the different certifications of each vendor, as well as the third-party tools, and the compliance and regulation and demands that you are facing. For instance, in this case, GDPR, and then you will need, and that is where CESAM comes in as well, because it has a very advanced, it's a graph engine running underneath here. So you have a lot or a rich data set and rich data exploration tool that makes it easier to handle that kind of regulations requirements. So as long as you know where your data is, you have the hooks in where they are, and you keep track of the lineage, you will be able to meet those regulations. It's fine that Azure is ISO 27001 certified, but that doesn't help you because you will still need to match that criteria. It just says that we can handle anything from the bottom side, but compliancy, data security, regulation, and so on, that's your problem anyways. Mm-hmm.
So to summarize, when and how to use multi-cloud architecture? And these conclusions are probably or might be obvious, but yeah, you should only use multi-cloud if the reasons are compelling or the need is undeniable. Benefits of cherry picking or improving IT agility or robustness of your systems, if they are compelling enough, if the plus,
The ROI is good enough.
if the return on investment is good enough, yeah. But you need to be realistic about your expectations. And as always, choose the simplest architecture. Heard about the KISS principle. Keep it simple. That applies here as well.
Yep. And in the end, of course, we will have a small quiz.
And there will be prizes, and there will be cheesy music.
So go to kahoot.it using your web browser on your mobile phone. You'll be asked to enter that number, and then you enter a name. And the questions are scored on correctness, but it's also scored on how quickly you answer correctly. And of course, there's a time limit. It had swapped during the...
It's much better now, isn't it? I think we are ready.
Is somebody still connecting? Yep. You good?
While we're waiting for the last contestants, I believe you asked a question. Well, you asked a second question, so you get two.
Well, you didn't give to these two as well, then. You gave up? Okay, we'll start. So, what is our definition of a multi-cloud? Long text, so I gave you an extra time on this one. Hey, not bad.
So we have Santa in the lead.
Hey, that's me.
Next question. Do you recommend the accidental adoption? True or false? Wow, you paid attention.
But not everyone was quick enough.
Next question. Jake is in the lead. What is the strategic engagement adoption?
Oh, that was too difficult, sorry. And Santa is back.
Can multi-cloud lead to networking woes? Awesome.
What is dark data? Still the same people in the lead. So, still have a question left. Which 3 phases do you use to uncover dark data?
This is kind of hard.
I think this is the most difficult Kahoot we've had this week.
Oh, Jake's in the lead again. Cool.
Knocked Santa off the throne.
How should you enable cloud disaster recovery?
Number 8.
Do you recommend a multi-cloud strategy? It depends.
We're consultants. Or GBS, yes. GBS, I thought they just said no.
Last question. What is Azure Arc? So those who followed the announcement at Ignite, they knew the answer to this question. And it's a multi and hybrid cloud administration tool.
Yeah, it's my bad. I had planned to talk about it, but I forgot it. The thing is that... Yeah, it's in the keynote. But the thing is, multi-cloud, as we mentioned in the beginning, salespeople said it's a trend. But the cloud vendors are picking up on it as well. Arc was announced now, and then Google earlier this year announced Athos, which is a multi-platform or multi-cloud platform development tool. So there are movements that support that kind of strategy, so multi-cloud, in more ways than one, which is good.
So let's see who won. It was Jake. Congratulations, Jake. Where's Jake? There's Jake.
Yeah.
And DY and Bavia.
So come up here for prices?
Yeah, well, before you go, please remember to submit your evaluations. You can win prizes. And also, you can make us better.
Yeah. And if anybody wants stickers, we have them up here.
If you want ribbons, we have that here as well. So thank you.